to see everyone here this evening. If you take your Bibles, please, and turn to Isaiah, the 65th chapter. Beginning with verse 17, we'll answer our first question. I'm striving to make sense out of the book of Revelation as far as trying to understand the points that God is making. I want to follow the thinking of God. And He, in this book, put things in signs and put things in figurative speech, but they have their own laws, and being faithful to those things, I think we can understand what He's talking about. But what we see here, beginning in Revelation, next to the last chapter, we're almost through with the book. But here's the glory of what the saint is serving God for. Here's the one that overcomes. Here's the result. We need to understand and grasp what that means and how He signifies that glory. In Revelation 21:1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Our question is, why is this church described with such terms as a new heaven, new earth? I'm making an assumption. Is my assumption right that's talking about the church? And why would we say that? And I want us to lay down from Isaiah 65 in a context that's not even speaking here about the church. Its prophecy will be fulfilled in that, but in another way. Remember when, and this is why we studied Isaiah, Daniel, we've studied Ezekiel, is that you'd have the Bible knowledge in the background to say, I can understand these principles and I see why it's being applied to the church. But in what state is it applied to them? So if you turn with Isaiah 65 and verse 17, what does Isaiah behold? What does your Bible say? For behold, I create new heavens and new earth. Who's speaking? God is speaking. And He's creating new heaven and new earth. I wonder what He means by that. Listen to Him. For the former things shall not be remembered or come to mind. He's speaking to His people that will be in Babylonian captivity. And why will I say that? Is because everything He says in here is what happened to Jerusalem when it was conquered by the Babylonians. And I just picked the highlights. So the former things will not be remembered. There's a new atmosphere to live in. New heavens and new earth. Where could you go to exist? Heaven, earth. There's no other place to go. It's new heaven, new earth. It's a new atmosphere to live in. What's that atmosphere like? Verse 19, I rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people, and there shall be heard no more the voice of weeping and sorrows. That sound like what we're going to get in Revelation, where He wipes away every tear? Might be connected. We might be talking about something that's similar. I think so. But why would these people not cry anymore? Because they have a new existence. It's a new atmosphere to live in. So we see in verse 20, there shall be no more thence infant of days, not an old man that hath not filled his days, for the child shall die 100 years old. Why would that be significant to the people of Jerusalem when the Babylonians came in and burnt it to the ground? They had children that didn't live a long life. They didn't have people that lived to be old. And listen to this. It says, and the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. If a sinner gets to live to be 100 years, he's accursed because he's not the righteous people of God. And what we're going to see, who is not allowed to be in this city in Revelation? The unrighteous. They're accursed. They're not able to go there. Danny? Well, and the sinner is the one. I'm looking at it. Some of the manuscripts have that, but that would be the concept. If you live to be 100, you're still going to be accursed, because and the sinner is, at least in some of the text, not the one you're using. We're going to be looking at that with the new heavens, new earth too. Some of our translations are based upon manuscripts that are different, but the same point is being made. that because it's in a context of children living a long time. It's a context of men becoming old and living a long time. They didn't get to do that when the city was conquered, because Babylonians, they came and killed men and women and children. And so that point I wanted to stress. Now look at verses 21, 22. And they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For as the days of a tree shall be as the days of my people, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. I'm in an atmosphere that I'm not going to be delivering my land that I worked for to the Babylonians. That's the immediate application of Isaiah's prophecy to the people in 700 BC. But it's that imagery that God takes to John and reveals to the church about their future. They'll long enjoy the works of them. Now, drop down to verse 24. And it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer. And while they are yet speaking, I will hear. What does sin do with the ear of God? Sin, I hid my face from it, I will not hear. Before they even ask, his attention will be with his people. A changed atmosphere for my people. He did not hear them when they cried with Babylon conquering them, because they were being punished for their sins. This is a new heaven, new earth. This is a new existence where the characteristics of their life are different. I will be listening to them before they even pray, is the point. Then verse 25, the wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and the dust shall be the serpent's food. Who's conquered? It's Satan. But what's being accomplished here? The ox and the wolf, they're eating the same thing. What is that a picture of in Isaiah? We've studied about that. He lays down with animals that would destroy them. It's because there's peace. It's a peace that they haven't. Straw, the wolf and the lamb shall feed together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox. It's going to be, these wild beasts are going to be like domesticated animals or farm animals. There's going to be peace. Is the church the new heaven and new earth where peace dwells, where unrighteousness is not seen among the people? That indeed they are enjoying a new existence, and we begin to see, well, that's true. It's something that is coming that will be new in its character. Well, it was new with Isaiah and the people in Babylonian captivity. It was new when we see the church being established and there's peace. And Isaiah spoke about the peace that would come through the Messiah and the Son of God. What kind of peace is it? It's the kind you read in Ephesians 2, where Jesus is our peace, where Jew and Gentile are one man in Christ. So it is speaking about the church. But here, and this is where people interpret Revelation differently, they think all of Revelation is talking about the church. What about the church in its glorified state? That's what they deny, and that's what I affirm. That we're looking at, in a context, what has happened in verses 11 through 15 in chapter 20. Have we had what seems to be the end of time judgment? Great white throne, books are open. If you're not having the book of life, you're cast in the lake of fire. It is the second death. Idea that will be something that will be continuing on. It sounds like the end to me. And then all of a sudden, in chapter 21, we see the new heavens and new earth. And well, that Isaiah pointed toward the church with that terminology. Now, John's taken it and says, church, you got to look forward to new heaven and new earth. Does 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter, does it speak about that we as Christians, members of the church, are looking forward to a new heaven, new earth? Is that possible? How do you interpret 2 Peter 3? And this is why some brethren, they don't interpret that the end of time. They think that's still the church coming out of Judaism, which to me, the heaven and earth, they pass away with what? Great noise. I think we're consistent with the context that we're speaking about what kind of people. Seeing that these things are all to be dissolved, verse 11, heaven and earth dissolved, all the works therein burned up. What manner of persons ought ye to be, dear Christian? Holy living and godliness should be your characteristic of your life, looking for and earnestly desiring the coming of the day of God. Coming of the day of God, as Old Testament, was always judgment. Coming of the day of God, New Testament, is judgment. But it's not judgment with Babylon, it's judgment at the end of time with God coming, the Lord coming. It's the day of the Lord. It's the coming of the day of God, by reason of which the heavens and on fire shall be dissolved with elements that shall be melt with fervent heat. But according to his promise, we in this state, in 2 Peter 3, being persecuted, we're members of the church, we look for new heavens and new earth. What dwells there? Not the sinner, he's accursed. It's where righteousness is. So I think it is scriptural that we can see Isaiah speaking about the coming of the church, but John takes that same terminology of what it is. What's the principle? You'll have a new atmosphere to live in. You won't remember the things that are before because you're so much enjoying the pleasantries that you have. You're dwelling in your house. You're eating of your vineyard. You planted it and you get to live in it. You didn't get to do that when the Babylonians took over. And there's peace. Farm animals are dwelling with wild beasts. There's peace. And Isaiah spoke in terminology that's figurative. And our obligation to know God and to think about his word is that we try to make some sense out of that. So I think with chronologically, we're looking at the end of time things, and so what would that be? That would be the church in its glorified state. Because what happens from Revelation 21, 9 on, he tells you the characteristics of that glorified city in imagery that is glorious. And that's the church in its glorified state. Now, here's something I want us to grasp. How come at the end of chapter 20, we've got people who are not found in the Lamb's book of life, they're cast out in the second death, and all of a sudden we have the new Jerusalem, the new heaven and new earth coming down out of heaven, and we have that in verse 1, and then we have in verse 10 that verse 9 and 10, that we have the same thing coming down out of heaven. What is he accomplishing in the first 8 verses of chapter 21? Verse 1, you got the verse 2, you got the holy city, New Jerusalem, come down of heaven. And the verse 9, you have the invitation of the angel. I'll show you the bride and the wife of the Lamb. Yeah, that's the church in its glorified state, because that's what we're going to see after. But he says here, the holy city of Jerusalem come down out of heaven. What happens between verse 1 and verse 10? And why should you be interested in that? I mean, so God, why'd you put that in there? Why don't you just go and tell us about the glorified state of the church? Because I think that's true. We've already been assured of it in Revelation, and that's right. And he's stressing it, isn't he? He is stressing, he's taking you, here's what's going to end the judgment, but I want to let you know, church, this is what has been unfolded, and then I'll tell you about the glorified state. Now see how that happens. Look at these verses with me. At this time, the first heaven, first earth passed away, and so forth. He heard a great voice, verse 3, and he says, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. So here we see we've been the temple of God, and here the temple of God is with men. He shall dwell with them, they shall be his peoples, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. Well, I thought he's my God now. I thought we're the temple of God now. We are. But here's going to be the context. The first heaven, first earth are passed away. The sea is no more. That which around the throne in Revelation 4 transcended, it kept me away from God, is no more. Death is no more. All of those things have ended. And he's now said, here's that state that I want you to see you've come to. And so we pick up in verse 4, he shall wipe away every tear of their eyes. They'll be consistent with the new heavens and new earth that Isaiah's taught. It's not something he threw on you new. You've studied that. You understand the Scriptures. And all of those things are there. And then he says, behold who sits upon the throne. He says, I make all things new. New heavens, new earth, new atmosphere. He's making everything new. And so he writes, these are the words that are faithful and true. He's taken us what leads up to this point. As we're saying, he's reminding them of what leads up to this point. So he says, they that all come to pass, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Yeah, we know that. We've heard that before, Jesus. What does he mean by Alpha and Omega? You Greek scholars? Yeah, that's right. And we ran out of 26 letters for storms. What did we go to? We got to Beta, didn't we? And they were waiting for Delta. That's what some were waiting for. He said, Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, I will give unto him that is athirst the fountain of the water of life freely. Have we gotten there yet? As a church? Are we still longing for it? Well, go back with me to Revelation 7, and here it fits the context. When we studied this, we made sure we had this distinction in our mind. There were some saints dwelling on earth. They need to be protected. They need to be shown that they're not under the wrath of God, and so he sealed them. But there were some in verses 13 following that didn't need to be sealed. Why? Because they're already dead. They're saints that have died. They don't need to be sealed and protected while they dwell upon earth. What's their condition? Well, they don't hunger anymore, neither thirst anymore, neither shall the sun strike upon their head with heat, verse 16. But what do they do? For the Lamb is in the midst of them, and shall be their shepherd, and shall guide them unto the fountains of the waters of life, and God shall wipe every tear from their eyes. Have we seen that in Revelation 21, 1 through 4? Every tear be wiped away. And here they still needed to be led to the fountains of the water of life. They're already dead. But what hasn't happened yet? The glorified state of the Christian has not occurred yet. And we're still following the shepherd unto the promise of the coming when we'll be able to drink the water of life freely. And we'll see that in Revelation 22. When we finally get to enjoy the tree of life. What is it? It's the church in its glorified state. When we as individuals enjoy the blessings of heaven. And he's simply taken us through the judgment again, because what do we see in verse 7? He that overcometh shall inherit through these things. Well, I thought the end of time has already come. It came in chapter 20, and we had the end of time throne scene. Yeah, he's reviewing it. He's taking you where you've been. And he says, if you still overcome, this is what's ahead of you. Remember, I've been telling you that. And we now see what they're going to inherit in verses 9 following. And he said, I'll be their God, they shall be my son. But what happens? The fearful, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, fornicators, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their part shall be in the lake that burneth with fire and brimstone. So we talked about that in Revelation 20. Why are we talking about it now? Let's get on with this thing. I'm tired of it. That's the way people might look at it. And the question is, why would he review that? Because he's building up for this great crescendo of understanding the glory of heaven, as we can see that. So he has pictures here. If you keep overcoming, you keep thirsting, you're going to enjoy the blessings. He tells you who's not going to be in that city. They're going to have the second death, just like the end of time judgment. But what he saw, he said, I see now, when you see the end of time judgment happening, I see the church in a new atmosphere of existence. And he said, I'm taking you through all the steps. And some of you living are still going through it. Now, who heads the list of those that are going to be in the lake of fire and brimstone? Who's the first one mentioned? The fearful. Why don't the fornicators get mentioned first? Why don't the murderers get mentioned first? It's the fearful and unbelieving. How important it is for us to be believers and as Christians never be fearful, even if it means our death. Why is that important to God? Pardon me, I think he mentioned it first for a purpose. He mentioned it first because He was trying to get Christians to stand and not depart from the faith and realize this is important to me. It's the fearful and unbelieving. They're going to have the same place where the lying idolaters, where they fornicated in the sense that they chose another god, and you would not resist bowing your knee to Caesar so you could live another day and so you could get a business deal, because worshiping the beast, that was commerce, that you had to do that in order to buy and sell. We've seen all this build up in the book of Revelation, and we see it now in these verses, taking you, pausing you a little bit. I see it, and this is how we got there. This is how we got there, and that is so beautiful to me to see that. It has the judgment. It has me still thirsting for the fountain of water of life. It tells me to keep overcoming. It tells me who heads the list of those who will not be able to go into this city, and they forfeit all these things. How sad it is, but the fearful and unbelieving are going to be right there with the murderers and all the sorcerers and those that are trying to get people to worship the beast of their magic. And what does he say? This is the second death. I saw the second death up here in Revelation 20. Why do I need to know about it again? I just want to grasp, God, why are you taking me there? You're allowing me to anticipate all that goes through with the church while it's here upon earth. And all of a sudden, he sees something coming down that is so glorious, and it's going to be our new existence. And it's going to be characterized in a new way. No tears, no death. And that's going to be just like it was in Isaiah 65. It's a new atmosphere of living, new in character. And to me, when you grasp that, you want to look at it from Revelation, you want to look at it from Isaiah 65, you want to look at things, then you've got to grasp. That's how we understand Scripture. You begin to see and then appreciate, take it where God leads you, and don't just get frustrated as, well, I just don't understand that, and why does he repeat all that? There's a reason why God repeats things. Is God a God of order or confusion? And that's what I'm trying to spend this time, so we won't be confused by it, because it has a message. It has overcoming, it has the second death, it has the different atmosphere you're going to be in that's so glorious. And just keep holding on, Christian. Don't bow your knee to Caesar. Overcome. So that's why I would answer the church is described in connection to heaven and earth, because they got a new atmosphere to live in. And he begins to describe that. Now, this is what's interesting to me too. When did we see John being led by the Spirit to see a city? Well, that's when it started. But when he is allowed to come, and we'll pick up in verse 9, there came one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, who were laden with the seven last plagues. Have we seen those angels before? And your point's right. I mean, that's when John received the vision. I'm saying, when have we seen in the vision this same idea of, come hither, I will show thee, in this case, the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a mountain great and high. When have we seen the invitation to John to come in the Spirit to see something? Because here we're going to see the bride adorned for a husband. We'll see that new heaven and new earth, the glorified state of the church. When have we seen this before? Well, let's go back to Revelation 17 and verse 1. And we see another city that is described. That he says the same thing to the angel that did the same thing of sending the seven plagues. There's the final judgment upon the people to get their mind set before the end of time comes. And the people still blaspheme God. They didn't work, so the judgment comes. Notice he says, there came down one of the seven angels that had the seven bowls and spake with me. That's exactly what happens in verse 9 of chapter 21. to see if we can see, is this the same thing? It's the same angel, I believe. Or at least one of the seven. And I think it'd be the same. But what does he say here in chapter 17? Come hither, I will show thee the judgment of the what? The great harlot that sitteth upon the waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and that they dwell in the earth were made drunken with the wine of her fornication. He carried me away in the spirit into where? Where does he carry John now? To a mountain. What did he want him to see then? The judgment upon the great harlot, and this is the city, and this is the chapter 7, mysteries, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. Here is this city that is, I'm applying it to Rome, the seat of the Empire of Rome, where the Caesar worship had its force. And Rome was this city and where all nations did business with her. And I said, I want you to see the judgment upon the great harlot. Now what is it? I'm not taking you to a wilderness. I'm taking you to where? A great mountain. I want you to see this glorified state that you're going to be in if you just keep on hanging in there and being faithful, church. And see, there's unity in this book. There's things tied together. And he's taken this and rehearsed it in these first few verses. And now we begin to see this city as he begins to describe it. Any questions or comments right now before we continue? All right, let's look. What is the end of the fearful and ungodly we saw in chapter 21 and verses 1 through 8 and so forth? What did we see? What is the fearful of the fearful and ungodly? Lake of fire. It's called the second death. And nobody's coming out of that one. It's the second final death. All right? Let's look at this city. I know this is a picture. Man writes it, but I thought, well, of all I can see, I could talk about it from that viewpoint. And we'll just see, is that the glorious city? I thought you were building up for something great. Well, it signifies something great. And we'll put all that together. When we look at this city, we began to see the things that are connected with that. And so we begin to ask these particular questions. Or so we get to see some things about it. Tell me how long and how wide is the city? You see where he tells you 12,000 furlongs? Now, he's measuring the city and the wall here in Revelation 21, and he says with a man with a reed, or it's an angel with a reed, but is as the measurement of a man. And so we'll begin to see is that here are measurements, and of course the New Testament says furlongs. What is a furlong? It was 1/8 of a mile. So tell me how long, or just tell me how wide the city is. And here in Revelation 21. I did the multiplication. If I do right, 1,500 miles. It's 1,500 miles long. It's 1,500 miles wide, but it is also 1,500 miles high. That's what the text says. And so it has kind of a picture that way. It's very high, 1,500 miles. And it's a perfect cube. It's just perfect. It's complete. But if we get into measurements, that's how he sees this. He saw it that long. Can you see for 1,500 miles? No, in my eyes, it's a long way, isn't it? And it's that high too. And this becomes very, very important because, see, when he measures the walls, how high are those walls? That's great. It's a great wall. Now, either we're going to look at it, it's that wide or it's that tall. Now, if it's that thick, a wall, that's a great wall, isn't it? But if I didn't have the measurements of the city, and what is a wall for? It's to protect the city. If I didn't have that, and I looked up here, and this the walls are 216, depending if from the point of your elbow to the tallest part of your finger up here of a man, the measurement of a man, the text says that, 18 to 21 inches, what happens. And how convenient that be? Give me 21 inches of that board there. Well, I'll put my arm there, and you cut right there. Let me move my hand. You can use that as a measurement. It's the measurement that an angel took with a reed. It's the measurement of a man. See, the text gives you those details. I think that's rich. And we begin to realize, well, what did it? Put it in my language now. I don't know what a cubit is. I don't talk in cubits, but I do talk in feet. I can grasp things in feet. And 216 to 218 feet, if you had a wall that tall, that would amaze me. But how tall is the city? It's 1,500 miles high. How could this be a great wall to look at it? And walls are supposed to protect a city, and it's 1,500 miles high. Not much protection, is it? Well, why will there be no need for protection? Because there's nobody going to enter that city that's unrighteous. There will be no more enemies of God. That's why kings and nations are bringing their abundance to the city. Because kings and nations have been fighting against the people of God. They've been connected with the beast. They've been connected with Rome. And they are now no longer in existence. And what happens is that the nations are enjoying the blessings of that city in its glorified state. It's not literally kings and nations are still coming to this city up on earth somewhere. It is a new atmosphere, and he's bringing in because they're no longer the enemies. And so it's still a great wall. It's high. But in comparison to this city, you wouldn't say, well, it's got to protect the city. No, it doesn't need protection, because what are the gates? Are they left open all day? Why? Because there's no night there. But who's standing beside each gate? An angel. What did angels do in the Old Testament? They kept the way of the tree of life. They guarded it. So it shows it's guarded, but it's open because the enemy has been destroyed. It is a glorious, glorious city. So we see pictures of that taking place. Now, we asked the question, and I just want to talk about, what are the gates made of? Pearl. In fact, every gate is a pearl. Well, what do you have in your mind when you think about that? Well, a pearl, I think, would be round. And here you got imagery. Why are those stones all different in color in this picture? Well, there's 12 of them. Different stones. I know that in verse 14, the wall of the city, the 12 foundations on them, the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Of course, the foundation stones are brilliant stones here in verse 19, but that's connected to the foundation stones, and there is a gate, and we know that how many gates are there? If there's 12, and this is a perfect city, you might think 3, 3, 3, 3. That would be a good way to divide it, and you'll be right. North, south, east, and west, the text tells us. And those are gates. They have angels standing by them. And here the foundation stones of that he sets forth here are the 12 apostles of the Lamb. What is a foundation described to you in imagery? Need a foundation for what? Have something strong. Build your house upon what? Rock. Foundation is sure. Thank you. Foundation is sure, and it's glorious. And what's the foundation? What did you build your life upon, saint, in the end of the first century? On the doctrine of the apostles, on the doctrine of the teaching of Christ through those apostles. That's a strong foundation, and now you're going to see the glorified state that you're in because you did not turn away from that. And this glorious pearl, I think the gate is there, but it's an opening, and you're allowed to see the glorious golden street, singular here. I think representing all the streets that are coming forth. But there's a picture of that with the 12 foundations, the 12 apostles, and the stones that are glorious, and it's a pearl, and it's open and yet guarded. And there's a great high wall. Now, let's talk about this with our time. What is the significance of the city with the great and high wall? It's great, and it's around the city. That would be great for protection. But the point is, it doesn't need to go all the way up because it's guarded by angels, the gates, and there's no enemy anymore. God has already conquered that. Question number 4, what is the significance of the gates? If foundation is strength, what are gates? They're access into a city. They're a way of leaving the city. Well, you're not going to leave the city, but the gates are open. There's one all one day. There's no night there. You talk about the pearl, verse 21, the 12 gates were 12 pearls. And he says each one had the several gates was of one pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, and it were transparent glass. It's glistening as diamond as it was shine. And that gold was like that. Again, he's stressing the glory of heaven, the church in its glorified state. That is indeed the coming. So that's significance of the gates. Any questions on that we might have? All right. What illuminated the city? What caused that city to shine in there? The glory of God, and let's be more specific in this text. That's right. Those are two things to put together. That's very, very good. Verse 11, the glory of God, her light was like unto a stone, having the glory of God, her light. And her light was like a stone, most precious, as it were a jasper stone, like a shining diamond is the glittering of that, clear as crystal. And then we see verse 22, I saw no temple. Verse 23, the city hath no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine upon it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the lamp thereof is the what? Is the what? He identifies the lamp. Well, isn't he God? If the glory of God is lighting the city, why is he called a lamp? And seem like, is he less than God? That's the wrong way to go. But it's the lamp, what reflects the glory of God? Who did that? Jesus Christ. What's your victory? It's the 12 apostles of the Lamb. It's the Lamb that's victorious, and you are connected with the Lamb, and the glory of God fills that city, and whose glory is being set forth there? It's the Lamb. Now, when you go to read in the New Testament, you read the account when Jesus was praying the night he was betrayed, and he prayed to the Father that the people that believed on him would be able to do something. And what would they be able to do one day? See his glory. That's heaven. It's not, I'll play golf, I'll knit, I'll do whatever thing I like to do on earth. We'll just, everything will be perfect, and I'll see everybody, and we'll go have coffee with that person. We try to make heaven it fit in why not put our minds, what's going to be glorious? I'll see the glory of the Lamb that I never saw while I lived upon earth. I will see the glory of the Lamb. You are indeed creator of all things. Your glory shines. Thank you for coming and dwelling upon earth as taking on the flesh and blood. And what we never saw with our naked eye, we only saw through faith. Heaven, that's what will make heaven glorious. Even if everything else is taken away. What is shining in that city? What makes it shine? Is there a temple there then? In that same context, there's no temple. Because we are in the very presence of God. Thank you. We're in the very presence of God. If that doesn't excite you, I don't have anything to offer. But to the Christian who has been tried and persecuted, who's still living, and knowing that some of us are still going to die, what a powerful force to remain faithful and not be fearful in the midst of fear. You are going to be put to death for not bowing your knee to the beast. And we're coming to see that glorious sign. Well, I know our time is up. Got that? Anything you want to add to that before we close? Thank you.